Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Neil Milbert. He is a Hall of Fame writer selected by the Illinois Basketball Coaches Association. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Yvonne.
You have an illustrious career, and this award took its time coming to you. And let's talk about all your writing career, and how did it get you basketball?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I covered basketball before I came to the Chicago Tribune. I worked for 6 years in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I covered a school there for 3 years, St. Peter's College. In fact, they had their best season in their history my last year there. Came to the Tribune in 1968, and I worked on the copy desk for a couple of years. Then I broke into writing and boxing. And then over the years, I started doing some basketball. The Tribune at the time covered everybody. I say all local colleges, Illinois Northwestern, UIC, Loyola DePaul, Notre Dame. They all had writers, so I was one of the many writers. And then I did horse racing, thoroughbred racing, harness racing. I did Blackhawks from 1976 to 85. So I wasn't so closely identified because there were multiple
writers for
basketball writers,
yes.
Whereas in racing, I was the only one for the Tribune. Hockey, I was the only one. But at any rate, then the latter years of my career, I covered Northwestern for many years, for about 8 years. I covered off and on. 1 year I covered DePaul, I covered UIC, I covered Illinois when they made the trip to the Final Four with D. Brown, Darren Williams, James Augustine. So I did cover a lot of basketball, but I happened to be at another banquet and met some guys from the Hall of Fame when we started talking about it, and I still do. I do freelance work for 22nd Century Publications.
That's where we mostly know you at Glenview Lantern.
Glenview
we
Lantern.
read your articles regularly.
Thank you. And these guys started they said, how many years is that all told? And do you think you covered for 15? I said, oh, yeah, at least 15, off and on, not consecutive, but
since
off and on.
2010,
And one of the guys said, you belong in our Hall of Fame, because I did the NCAA Final Four, men's and women's, Big Ten tournaments. I think I've covered games at every Division I college in Illinois, except for Southern Illinois and Carbondale and Eastern Illinois. Everybody
That's
else,
a
you name
huge
it.
Region.
And so consequently,
You're all
lo
over
and behold,
Illinois.
I'd forgotten about it. And one day I received a notification inviting me to the banquet in May and informing me that I was going to be one of the honorees, which is nice here also. A man who's become a friend of mine since I started working for the Glenview Lantern, really an outstanding girls coach, Steve Weisenstein at Glenbrook South.
He was acknowledged as well?
Last year he was inducted, and David Weber, the boys coach and girls badminton coach for the JV, he loves to talk about that, at Glenbrook North. He was inducted this year as a coach. And his brother, when I covered Illinois, Bruce Weber, was the Illinois coach.
Wow. So you know quite a few of our Glenbrook celebrities.
Yes. And Steve is a really, really wonderful coach. Glenbrook girls, this is his last year, and I'll really miss him, and I know the girls and parents will, because they really have a lot of, I've seen games where they've shown a lot of affection for him in their last game as seniors when they come out and have a ceremony. So it's quite nice to see a coach who has that much respect from the young women who play for him and their parents. It's really nice to see, heartwarming.
Yes, and you have covered basketball, but not just cover, but you play as well?
Well, I resumed my career when I was in my 40s. I was a decent high school player, but I was not a star or anything like that. But then I started playing again in my late 20s, early 30s, and then when I was doing horse racing and hockey for the Tribune, I stopped, and the Tribune got a new thoroughbred handicapper, a guy named Dave Sirico, and he persuaded me to come out to Bellwood to a boys club. He said, we're playing out there. I said, oh, Dave, I'm in my 40s. I'm too old. And he said, no, give it a try. So I gave it a try.
You said that when you were in the
liked
40s.
it. And then one gym led to another and another and another. And in 1986, a league, man who's an iconic Chicago high school basketball player, then went on to play at Seattle University and played the NCAA title game. Charlie Brown formed, he and another guy, Mickey Rotman, who'd been on a rival high school. Charlie went to DuSable, Mickey went to Roosevelt High School, and they formed something called the Windy City Senior Basketball League. It starts in March or late February and goes into June, and I joined that league the second year, and I played it in the league up until about, it's one night a week on the south side of Washington Park for about, until about 4 years ago, from the mid-1980s till about 4 years ago. And then after that, I continued playing in their summer tournament. I still play in the tournament every summer.
And this is a national league, right?
The Windy City, no, that's local, but and their tournament is also basically local. But then after I left the Tribune as a full-time writer, for the first couple of years, I went to a national tournament in St. George, Utah for 3 years in a row. I went to Buffalo.
That's very exciting for an amateur
yeah,
team,
it
right?
was good, you know, and I made a lot of nice friendships from it. Coral Springs, Florida, and we still right now I play pickup ball. Like I got to kind of limit my scope because we look after our grandchildren. I'm doing this writing work, but once a week I play pickup basketball at Brooks Park in Chicago. And then those of us at Brooks Park, we go to, in addition to this summer tournament at Washington Park, we go to Madison and Milwaukee for like one-day tournaments. In fact, we won a gold medal at Madison. We got an easy draw. It's just a one-day tournament, and we were undefeated. We only had one tough team, and we managed to beat them, but we had two easy teams. So I really enjoy that.
Yes, I can tell, and that's really important to keep basketball as just as enjoyment and still play so long.
Yes, and it's, you know, as I say, you meet the friendships you meet are equally important when you think about it.
Yes, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your writing for Glenview Lantern, and you met a lot of people in the Glenview.
Yes. See, the Glenview Lantern is part of a chain of weeklies called
21st Century.
22nd Century. And I always say I'm still locked in the 21st century because I'm not on Facebook or Twitter. And I say I fly over. I'm locked in the 20th.
Yes.
And I fly over the 21st, and then I enter the 22nd century when I do assignments for them. And then when I finish my assignment, I go back to the 20th century. The 21st century just passed me by. But and they have a chain of weeklies originally began on the far south side, like places like Mokina, suburbs like that, Frankfurt, New Lenox. And then they were successful, so they expanded to the North Shore. And now we have here in Glenview, Northbrook, Lake Forest, Highland Park, Glencoe, Wilmette, Winnetka.
Evanston, maybe too?
No,
not Evanston. But Wilmette has,
on Wilmette, Beacon, and unlike the Pioneer Press, which does kind of a shotgun approach, like you see a story in one school, you see them all, it's different. These are all very local centric. I'll do a story on Glenbrook South or the Glenview City Village Board, and it'll just appear in Glenview. It won't appear in Wilmette, it won't appear in even Northbrook, unless there's a corollary.
And there's a North Shore Weekend.
That's another publication.
Part of it, right?
No, that's not ours. North Shore Weekend is...
No, I mean 21st Century Media. Isn't it part of that?
No.
Okay.
It's just these 7 papers on the North Shore. And then when, as I say, they're very, very local centric. Like North Shore Weekend, the one you mentioned, is an excellent publication, but they, again, will do stories that appear in multiple regions or communities, whereas these are just
very
fixated. I did a story
specific for us.
last week. I do a lot of news stories, primarily news stories for these papers. I did one, for example, on a little boy, a really touching story at a nursery school here, who had cancer, who overcame it, and they were having a day. Everybody was wearing gold for
Yes,
cancer.
we did that last year. Yes, my
And
children were very much part of that. Yes.
and I did a story on him, but that just appeared in in the Glenview
Lecture.
paper.
Yes.
And there's another one I did about the Alzheimer's walk. And one of my former colleagues at the Tribune, Melissa Isaacson, both of her parents had it, and she participated in the walk. So I kind of led with her because hers was a very, very touching story.
Yes.
And that one appeared in Glenview and Northbrook because it was at Gallery Park here in Glenview.
Yes.
But so it was Glenview, but then
Glenbrook
it had
community.
a strong Northbrook connection too because of her
Yes,
and her involvement.
And we're a very close relationship with these schools and the Glen. So we often cover writers also in Northbrook, right?
Yes, and like some of the school districts, the grammar school districts overlap. You'll have students from both municipalities in the schools.
So you really know Glenview well.
Well, I've gotten to know all these suburbs now. I know all the ins and outs of the politics and the issues, and it's interesting. It's probably made me a more aware citizen of all things, zoning boards and things like that.
And we wouldn't know unless it was covered. We're just too busy in our lives now.
Many people are active, or I shouldn't say are active. Many people with a little time on their hands go to these meetings, but for the general public, they don't, which I think is one of the reasons for the success of these papers, because they provide information you can't get anywhere else. You can't get in the Tribune unless it's a major story. But if ordinary council meeting, very important to people of Glenview, but
it affects our lives immediately.
Yes,
so not something that
I think people appreciate that, and same way with the athletes. You know, it's rewarding because most of these kids I write about are never going to get their names in the paper again, and their parents.
Yeah, it means a lot to the parents.
Yeah, I see the love they have for them, like a woman from whose son played at Loyola Academy. He was a lineman, and she was so proud of him, and he recovered a fumble one time, a key fumble recovery in a game, and I put him in the story, and he put it in his scrapbook, and she asked if at the end of the season we could take a picture together. And then Nick Murphy was the young man's name, and nice thing, when I got this Coaches Award, the people at the 22nd Century were nice enough to do a story on me, and she also put that story in the scrapbook alongside Nick's picture.
Right.
You know,
I think this is very touching for all of us because I live in the community. I read it, and when I see athletes as a Glenbrook South faculty in the last 4 years, I really got to know my students better, or I knew the parents in the community that we can congratulate each other and builds the community, have something to talk about.
Yes, and it's really it's just nice because, as I say, I know how much in time and the parents invest, the heartbreak when their son or daughter gets injured and can't play for a while. And it's just, you know, I see them out there on senior day when they're honoring and tears running down their cheeks.
And you mentioned a sick boy who had cancer, and I can't help remembering the story that how you got interested in basketball. You were sick as a child, weren't you? And
yeah, I had. That's an interesting point. I had rheumatic fever when I was a little boy. In fact, between my second and third grade, I spent the whole summer in bed, and I had to learn to walk all over again.
Wow.
And I was. The doctor forbade me to play for a couple of years, so my own career got off to a late start. I was a better player when I got out of high school in all sports than I was in high school, but It was
But that time there was no computer games,
no.
and you studied the basketball
I
players.
listened to all the games during the summer. This was where the Field of Dreams is. Dyersville, Iowa is where I grew up. And I would listen to the Cub games every day. During basketball season, I would listen to the University of Iowa. They played on Monday night and Saturday night. I would on Saturday afternoon, I'd listen to football. And I knew I can still rattle off the starting lineups in the 1948 World Series for the
Wow,
Boston Braves,
that's
which
amazing.
then went to Milwaukee and now are in Atlanta,
And just
and the
by
Cleveland
yeah,
Indians, because I knew every player in the major leagues in baseball. I knew all starting lineups for the University of Iowa, and that never left me. And that was my start of my interest. And then I
yeah.
was, good. I say good as on a kid level in writing. I liked it, so that's how I gravitated. I realized when I got in high school I was never going to be a major league baseball player as I aspired to.
Yes.
So I
And
came into writing.
yes, but that's the inspiring part of your story, because I think most of us aren't going to be professional ball players. But then having that interest and continuing the sport that you have as just
Yeah,
along the side
it's kind of
is
fun
help. Yeah.
because later on outside of high school, there was a man who'd retired as a major league. He was a former major league baseball player, and I got to in a semi-pro game. This was between my sophomore and junior year. He got sick during a game, and I got to bat in a spot in the order, and they got a rally, and lo and behold, I was announced as a pinch hitter, and I got a
Wow.
hit. So that's people say, "Oh, the highlight of your career must be this or this award." I know the highlight of my career is once I got to pinch hit for a major leaguer.
Yes, yes.
And
That's quite an honor. So you were covering harness racing.
well, thoroughbred racing mainly. I covered
And
every Kentucky Derby from 1970 through 79, and then I was doing hockey for the Tribune. I resumed in 1984, and I covered until 2008, my last year at the Tribune. I missed one during that span when my son was running the last race. He was a Division III college runner at Gettysburg, and I skipped the Kentucky Derby to make sure I saw his final race.
your son is an athlete too, or
Well, he
on the
was a good
college.
athlete. Now he teaches at a school in the city called Northside College Prep, and
Oh
he has
yes.
5-year-old twin sons. So he kind of put his coaching on the shelf for a while. But this spring, he's going to go back as their track coach. So
Wow,
there's,
that's a great thing to have. Yes. So you're a Thai. Tell us a little bit
oh,
about
this
tell us a little bit
tie,
about this Thai. It's
this tie is a harness racing connection.
not thoroughbred.
No, because I did harness racing later in my career at the Tribune, but like for the Tribune, primarily the Triple Crown, or big races at Arlington, like the Arlington Million at Hawthorne Gold Cup. Locally, I did a lot of races. And then harness racing, when I came to the Tribune, they had two riders, a thoroughbred rider and a harness rider. Well, gradually there's less and less. So I did both. And after I left the Tribune, I went to a national banquet in Florida of the harness riders. And I showed up the banquet. I had a Monmouth Park is a thoroughbred track in New Jersey. They sent out, when we covered some race there, they gave us all a tie. So you wouldn't know it, nobody else would know it. It
But
just had,
insiders could
yeah,
tell.
it had Monmouth's
Emblem.
emblem
Yes,
on it.
emblem on it.
So consequently, nobody would know. Not even people at tracks here would say, "Oh, Monmouth
Right,
Park." You'd
right.
have to be in New Jersey. So I was at a table, and one of the women I knew from Harness Racing Communications and the Hambletonian Society. That's the big event in harness racing. She's part of their publicity arm. She looked at it and she said, "You have a Monmouth Park tie on at a harness banquet." She said, "I'm going to remedy that. I'm going to send you a Hambletonian Society tie."
And
So I forgot about it, and lo and behold, in the mail,
but that's
a couple of
but those true fans would know, and that's important too.
yeah,
Yes,
she was
to
from
the
New
coverage.
Jersey, as I said, and spotted it, and so I got parlayed my Monmouth Park thoroughbred tie into this nice tie.
So tell us a little bit about the basketball stories you covered and the.
Ooh, I covered, Illinois when they made it to the Final Four. I covered them. I covered Northwestern, was a really interesting period. I covered a team when Ricky Birdsong, the late Ricky Birdsong, I still run his 5K race, the man who was murdered in a hate crime. He was their former coach. He'd stopped coaching them. But they had a team. They had all kinds of trials and tribulations. They started as freshmen, and they were playing their last game of the regular season against Michigan. If they won that game, they'd go to the NIT. It's not as prestigious as the NCAA tournament, but it would be a real feather in their cap. But in order to do that, they had to beat Michigan, and Michigan had this great team. They called them the Fab Five, with all four of their five players made it the NBA, and they were really, really outstanding. But lo and behold, Northwestern upset Michigan on the last day of the year to deprive them of going to the national, or to winning the Big Ten title. And because of that victory, Northwestern got in the NIT. So that was really a highlight for me.
Yeah.
And then one time
Basketball
at the
history.
national tournament, an early round NCAA game, I covered a Valparaiso game. They were a big underdog against, and I've forgotten the opponent now, Georgetown, but they trailed by 2 points with like 3 seconds to go. They had the ball inbounding at this side of the court. The basket is on this side.
Opposite.
And a guy threw a long pass. One of the players tipped it in the air to Bryce Drew, the coach's son. He shot a 3-point shot, left his hand just as the buzzer went off, went through the net.
Wow.
They still show it at the NCAA, one of the
Yes.
great all-time highlights.
And you were there.
Yeah, and he won. I was sitting about right at the court because I'm
Right.
watching this. I said to myself in my mind, I'm saying, what a shame. They came so close, you know. And then I see the ball in the air, and I see the guy leap up and tip it, and he tips it to Bryce Drew, and I said, oh my gosh.
That's good.
And the perfect
Poised.
form, and I see the ball, I said, you know, it left his hands. I think, oh my gosh, if that goes in, they win. And while all this is racing through my mind, the shot goes through, and pandemonium.
Yes.
And
yes.
that was really, really probably the most moving moment I ever had.
Yes, and with the crowd.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And another one before I came to the Tribune with St. Peter's College, they also, they went to this tournament when it was a prestigious tournament, the NIT, and they got massacred by Southern Illinois University, but the next year they managed to squeak back in, and they won their first game. They made it to the quarterfinals, and their opponent was Duke, which was ranked number 4 in the country. In those days, the NCAA was much smaller,
yeah.
so only champions came, and Duke had been upset in the postseason tournament for the conference, so they couldn't go to the NCAA, so they went to the NIT, and everybody said, oh my gosh, St. Peter's will never beat Duke. Well, lo and behold, St. Peter's got in a roll, and they upset Duke. It was the greatest victory in the school's history, and they made it to the NIT semifinals.
Yes.
So that was, that was a memorable moment, because when you're there and kind of part of, it's not in the big picture, people in Chicago wouldn't know about, but you talk to anyone in St. Peter's,
Yes.
you were there for that
Yes.
game?
And it's something that's totally different from watching on a video.
Yes.
That
Oh,
you
yeah.
are
You're there.
part of this
It's,
community.
It's like now, I have a hard time when I do go to games when I'm not covering. In fact, I rarely do, because you want to be busy. You want to be taking notes. And I even stopped on television first when I left the Tribune. I'd watch all these teams I used to cover, and I found myself taking notes. And all of a sudden one night I said to myself, wait a
What am I
minute, you're
doing?"
not getting paid to be an expert on this anymore.
Right, right.
Get on with your life. So I
Yeah.
went cold turkey.
That must be a hard thing to stop doing, right?
No, now
Yes,
people say,
yes.
well, did you see that Bulls game last night? No, just what I read about in the paper.
Yeah.
I just don't have the time, and I do enough sports for 22nd Century, for papers like the Glenview Lantern
Yes.
to get my fix.
And the high school teams play very well. I
Yeah,
mean,
oh
they're
yes,
very
yes.
exciting to watch.
It's a different
It's
form of basketball
Yes.
because they don't have a shot clock.
Yes.
And they don't have as many big kids. You know,
Yes.
they
Not
have
the-
some, so it's,
yeah.
and each year the recruiting classes, or I say the recruiting class, the class is different. So the coach has got to deal with the deck
Different
he's
skills, yes.
dealt. And it's a different game, just as college is different than the NBA.
Yes.
There's very, and a high school game is interesting in its own right. They're very interesting. And the high school girls game is interesting because they, Glenbrook North has had, or Glenbrook South has had some great shooters. They're on their girls team.
Yes. So Neil, besides becoming an expert on Glenview politics and the community and our ball players, what else do you do?
Well, I never dreamed when I stopped working full-time for the Tribune I'd be this busy. Our son and his wife, are both of whom are teachers, had twin boys 5 years ago. They'll be celebrating their 6th birthday. So from about 4 months old on, my wife and I were the daycare. And then when last year, a year ago, our daughter, who lives in Palatine, our son and his wife live in the Edison Park neighborhood of Chicago. Our daughter lives in Palatine. She and her husband had a baby boy. So my wife looks after the baby boy. I take her out to Palatine. I live in Wilmette. Take her out to Palatine in the morning, do my writing for 22nd Century in the morning, try to schedule a workout where I run on the track near her home, and then get in the car and drive to Edison Park to pick up the twins from kindergarten.
Yes.
So that's
You are
stay
very
with them
busy.
till 4 o'clock, back to Palatine, back home to Wilmette, about 3 nights a week, back out for an assignment for 22nd Century.
That sounds like a very busy, yeah, for semi-retired, right?
But the good part is my grandsons, the twins, are engaging in a lot of sports, and for little kids, they're very successful. You know, I'm not going to say they're going to be great athletes or anything, but they're at the head of the class now in sports. So it's fun to see them and to see how much they love it. They not only participate, but they have a genuine love for the games that they play, which
That's
is
nice
good.
to see the next generation develop love for the sport like you have.
And I think they're much further, my son says they're further along advanced than he was, and I would agree with that, and they're certainly further along advanced at age 5 than I was, way ahead of us. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Thank you, Neil, for visiting with us.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's my pleasure. Hope to see you again.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.